And so I took it upon myself. I said, look, how many other people have this background with all of this, being immersed in Christianity, knowing it very well, knowing the language that it was initially proselytized in, knowing the history, because I was actually in the dirt at Corinth. At Corinth, of all places, is where I excavated.
Wow.
And that's where St. Paul was supposedly addressing the Corinthians in the Epistle to the Corinthians.
Sure.
So this is, really down and dirty in the dirt, nitty-gritty stuff that I'm talking about that I've unearthed. And preparing for the show, I have to say, Peter, I was looking through the transcript for Part 1 that you had posted online.
Right.
And I had to say I was struck by what a great job you did. This is a brilliant overview. It really is. Overall, it's extremely sound. There are just a few words I would tweak here and there.
Sure, like always.
Yeah, but you really did a great job, and I think you should be commended for getting this information into the minds of so many people, millions and millions and millions of people. It's never been done before in the history of humanity. Has this information ever gotten into so many people's minds?
Well, it's amazing to me that, obviously it's certainly struck a nerve by all means, and I'm, of course, fascinated by it. The film itself is either attacked on one side or the other. It's either attacked that the religion section's attacked and people just ignore the other section, or people tend to believe some of the religion section, then they attack all the other sections. Obviously, I think Zeitgeist will go down in history as one of the most attacked films of all time, most likely. But that's okay, because it gets people thinking, and I want to thank you, of course, for helping me with that opening section as well, even though it was after the fact. That film goes through things very, very quickly, as you pointed out in notes. So what we can do today is begin to expand on a lot of these things that people hear, and they go to an encyclopedia, and they say, wait a minute, it doesn't say that in my encyclopedia. And,
encyclopedia surfing, I call it. Oh.
Yes, exactly. And that's the general nature of most debunkers these days anyway. So I'm looking right now at the Zeitgeist Challenge website, and I'm looking at all the claims that are made by the film that they say basically doesn't exist and they want proof of. So how do you want to do this? For one, I can just basically, Horus, for example. We have Horus born on December 25th, which most people don't seem to understand that we're talking about the winter solstice more than anything else. Would you expand on the birth of Horus? And you can go in whatever direction you like as far as these points.
Sure. Let me explain a couple of things about how the historical process and scholarship work. First of all, not everything makes it into the dictionary or the encyclopedia. Okay? Sure. Encyclopedia surfing is completely inadequate. These things have been censored. These are talk about short digests. This is just a few paragraphs on a subject, and they don't put in the stuff that's going to upset the status quo. Okay?
Yeah.
This stuff has been edited out. There was something called the Inquisition. Ever heard of it? They destroyed thousands and thousands of books for the very purpose that we're talking about now, that this information is not in these books because they didn't want it in there. So I had to dig up this stuff. Some of this stuff is barely even translated into English. If you go to Christ in Egypt, you'll find some translations for the first time into English.
Right.
I had to dig up stuff that was in German, handwritten German. It was extremely difficult. On this specific issue, in fact, the December 25th, or rather the winter solstice celebration in ancient Egypt, you'll see people go, oh, well, I've actually seen Egyptologists have read where they said there doesn't seem to be any winter solstice acknowledgement in Egypt. And I'm going, well, yeah, there certainly is. Here are a bunch of hieroglyphs. In fact, they include in the book the hieroglyph for the winter solstice. It shows the goddesses Isis and Nephthys on either side of the sun, holding a baby sun over an ankh, giving life to the sun. This is the hieroglyph for the winter solstice. So they have this beautiful hieroglyph, in fact, to describe the winter solstice. The winter solstice was extremely important in ancient Egypt. There are many buildings aligned to the winter solstice. The Temple of Luxor, I believe, is one. There are, in fact, here's where, when you're talking about the December 25th birthday, okay, now, first of all, why that day and not the 21st, 22nd? That needs to be explained, too. There's a 3-day period, a trigium or a trigium, that the ancients recognized that at that point it seemed like for 3 days the sun was not moving either south or north. This is from a geocentric perspective. that it was dead in a tomb, so to speak, because that's where it seemed to be going, into the tomb. It was going to die. This is towards the winter solstice when everything is the days are getting shorter and shorter. And so there seemed to be there's this 3-day period where the sun on the sundial seemed to be not moving at all, and the sun was dead. So they said that it stopped. Solstice means sun stops. Sun stops moving. So the sun stopped for 3 days, and then it was born again, and it would be, the 24th at midnight, basically. So that's why we have this Christmas Eve thing going on. So it's not a mistake to say that the sun was born again on the 25th. Okay, that's not a mistake. That has ancient tradition, and there's a reason for it. It wasn't like there's some calendar issues going on. Calendar's very fascinating. I've been working on a calendar. I'm going to be releasing that soon.
Okay.
The calendar is very fascinating to follow, too. However, so when we're talking about the winter solstice, December 25th is fine to acknowledge because it is part of the winter solstice, the 3-day period. Okay, so we have, for Horus, for example, we have this ancient testimony called Plutarch. Plutarch is about as close as we're going to get to a kind of a digest, an encyclopedia. Diodorus Siculus, before that, in the 1st century BC, also lays this out. Herodotus does a little bit, but not quite the same as writing kind of an encyclopedia entry type thing. Otherwise, we don't necessarily have this type of writing going back to these eras before that. For one thing, as I explain in this document that I just created, especially for you on this show, called Zeitgeist Challenge, the Real Zeitgeist Challenge, which can be accessed at my website, truthbeknown.com.
Right.
I have it right there at the top now, so you just can go right there and boom.
Oh, good.
I describe about this primary source business, which is there's always squawking about primary sources, this and that. First of all, there are no primary sources for Christianity, so people in glass houses shouldn't be throwing stones. Secondly,
good point.
Secondly, what this does all the time raises this incredibly infuriating historical period of destruction that was caused largely by Christians on a rampage in Europe and Egypt. There's a new movie coming out about Hypatia that shows this destruction, by the way, and if it doesn't get your blood boiling, you're not alive.
Sure.
They're just knocking down statues and destroying and defacing them. It's still going on in Egypt now with Muslims, cutting off the noses, cutting off the arms, just destroying all this information. Yeah. Books, literature, which was extremely difficult to get even especially back then, because they were handwriting it. There was no printing press.
Oh, sure.
So somebody's taking the time to write out this book, and somebody else comes along and burns it, destroys it. This is going on. The early church father works survive, and we find out a lot of information from them. But what they're writing about, those are conveniently destroyed or lost.
Right.
How come? How come the Christian writings all survive, but the pagan ones don't? So whenever you hear this primary sources thing, that's what you should be reminded of. The pagan history has been destroyed deliberately. Why? Well, we can kind of piece these things together. So we don't have these things like a neat little encyclopedia entry, but we have indications of it, and then we can go back and check. We have this Plutarch specifically stating that Horus was born at the winter solstice. So what do we find out to corroborate that? We find out, first of all, that he's accurate in almost everything else he says, and this is stated by Egyptologists. So we have no reason to doubt him. He's not playing to a Christian audience that's going to say, oh, that's not true, because there isn't such a thing at that point. Nobody's going to attack him. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no reason for him to be telling any kind of falsehoods about the story. There's no reason at all.
Absolutely.
So what do we find? We find that, yes, indeed, the birth of the sun is discussed in inscriptions prior to the Common Era. We find also that there are temples to Ra-Harakti, which is one of the aspects of the sun god, the Horus-Ra combination. These temples are aligned to the winter solstice rising sun. And here's a little clincher, and I'm so loath to give out some of this information because it took me so long to dig it up and put it together, and it's in my book. There's great stuff in that book that you cannot even imagine how long it took me to find like one paragraph.
I can imagine. I saw the intensity of that book. By all means, I certainly recommend it.